Hey folks, my name is Pravus and welcome to more Plague Inc. Evolved as we continue our new and improved series of Mega Brutal guides. Today we are moving on to the Fungus, and this is the first disease type that's going to be quite different from what you've seen before with the bacteria and with the virus. The Fungus really struggles to spread internationally, whether that be by land, sea, or air transmission. To counteract that, the Fungus has a special ability called the Spore Burst, which is going to infect a random country in the world. This is very helpful to give you a very wide early game spread across multiple continents and to pick up some of those pesky islands that may have shut down their ports. However, it also means that the Fungus has a very RNG dependent game. Every single run is going to look very different from each other no matter what your starting country will be. So getting 5 stars on Mega Brutal with the Fungus is very, very difficult. This can be done with this guide that I'm going to show you, but that's not really the intention. I'd rather show you what I think is a more consistent method of beating this on Mega Brutal, and you can try to optimize or just keep rolling the dice from there. Now, as far as our genetic code, this is something we're going to change up very dramatically here. I'm going to go for the metabolic jump because we are going to have early red bubbles, so this is still going to get me some early game DNA, kind of like the ATP boost, but also more gas overall to help sustain the run. I'm also going to go to Darwinist for the mutation chance. Genetic Mimic is still a good choice here, but I know that the genetic drift is going to kick in a little bit harder in this particular run, so everything is going to get very expensive very quickly. The right mutation for the right symptom at the right time can save my run. It also might make things a little bit harder, so this is a high-risk play, but I think it's going to pay off. For our travel gene, we don't need Aquasite this time. The main reason you pick up Aquasite is to get to islands, but with the right usage of the Spore Bursts, we can guarantee that we get into those islands. Spreading by land, however, is a little bit more valuable to us, and therefore suppression makes sense. I'll stick with our typical extremophile, and then we're going to go for pathostasis instead of symptostasis. I do not want the cost of my Spore Bursts to increase, otherwise at some point it doesn't become very economical to do that. So this was going to make sure that ability costs do not increase. However, just be aware that now your symptoms are going to get more expensive the more you evolve, so you need to be very intentional about what you pick up. We'll play on Mega Brutal, and sure, I'll call this Tender Dark, that seems fine. Now I will again start in Saudi Arabia. Some people actually like starting in India this time around. It doesn't really matter that much where you start as the Fungus, because once you use your Spore Bursts, you're going to be spread to so many countries early on, it's kind of like having several different starting locations, so it's not as critical, but I still think that Saudi Arabia is a decent choice, and I don't want to trigger the genetic drift too early if I can avoid it by starting in India, so that's up to you. Now, as far as our starting evolutions, I'm actually going to go for some symptoms, going for the skin lesions, as we usually do. The reason why is I do want to get some of that early game severity. Why? Because I want to have extra DNA whenever I pop any of these bubbles. See, once we go to our abilities here, I can use this Spore Burst. It costs me 1 DNA, and it's not going to increase in cost thanks to the pathostasis, and this will create a red bubble when we infect a new country. I would like to get multiple DNA for every one of those red bubbles we pop. That means that I actually start generating more DNA than it costs as I start infecting different countries. But to do that, I really would like to get some extra severity. That's what guarantees I get extra value. So let's go ahead and work down the rash and the sweating. We're going to go for our skin lesions, which, by the way, is now going to cost 10 DNA instead of 8 because symptostasis is not active. So it gets more expensive the more we pick them up, but this is a decent amount of severity. It's not quite enough, though. I would like a little bit more. We're going to go for Insomnia, and then we're going to go for Paranoia. That generates a pretty good amount of the extra severity, but also is going to reduce the likelihood that people go to the doctor, and since we're going to be spread to so many countries, there's many opportunities for people to discover us early on. Paranoia buys us just a little tiny bit more time. So I'm looking for 1 more DNA point. Come on. Any second now. Thank you. That'll do. Now, this is just about enough severity. You could go for literally anything else, whether that be coughing or probably cysts might be a better option, or nausea. That might get you a little bit extra. This is about the threshold where you start getting some extra DNA, though. We might low roll this and start only getting 3 DNA. We might high roll it and get 4 DNA, but I think it's good enough at this point that we're ready to go ahead and get started. So let's go to our abilities. Again, it's only going to cost me 1 DNA. We're going to do a Spore Burst, and then we're not going to do more than 1 of these at a time. In fact, I'm going to slow down the game just to normal speed and wait for our first pop-up, in this case, in Spain, which got me 4 DNA instead of the 2 that I would have gotten from 1, infecting, and 2, the metabolic jump. But the extra severity just gave me 2 extra DNA. Now, the reason we're only doing this one at a time, if you do multiple spore bursts at a time, there's a chance, even if it's pretty small, that they will infect the same country, which means you kind of wasted the value of one of your spore bursts. And every one of these is precious, so I really don't recommend doing more than one of them at a time. Let's just go ahead and slow down the game. Now, one thing that's bothering me is we're infecting a lot of places around Africa, but what you really want to see is a spore burst that affects North or South America in particular. That's what's important, because you need to start getting some land transmission going over here. If we do not get anything in North and South America, that's pretty much my trigger to just go ahead and restart with the scenario. And that may seem a little bit silly, but I mean, I just think it's important that you just get into North and South America. The Caribbean kind of helps with that. Not good enough, though. I'd really rather get into a place like Brazil. There we go. We got into Argentina. Excellent. I don't feel the need to go for a reroll here. Now we're going to stop with our spore bursts. There is something here in the middle called spore eruption, which is going to infect multiple countries at once. I believe it is 4. I'm going to save these for later on, though. These 2 spore eruptions are my catch-all to guarantee that I get into islands that I otherwise have missed before they shut down. So we're not going to worry about that right now. Now we have 29 DNA, so I generated a lot of DNA in a pretty short period of time. So now we can start looking at going for some transmissions. I do want to go for some air and some water transmission. Air especially because 1, Saudi Arabia, 2, I did see a pop-up that the planes were getting some sterilization features, so I need to have that if I want to continue spreading. And then I'm going to go for some bird transmission. I don't usually do this, but the extra land transmission is very helpful if you're playing as the Fungus, because again, we otherwise really struggle there. So birds are great, plus a tiny bit of extra mutation chance can't be that bad. Now, I might normally want to go for some air and additional bird transmission, but instead I'm now going to focus on getting some cold resistance, because I believe we did start off in a couple of cold countries, like Norway. Norway does have the ability to get to places like Greenland, so I'd like to speed that up just a little bit. I'm going to focus on getting cold and drug resistances just to make sure that we are more impactful in the countries that I have already infected. We're going to start hitting critical mass here in Saudi Arabia right about now. I am seeing some land transmission happening right now, so the birds are doing their job. That is great. Going for drug resistance is going to be important here, so we can get some good spread in places like Europe. Europe and Canada actually usually end up being a pretty sizable problem for you in this scenario. But, I mean, hopefully the Spore Burst will work for you. Again, this is where a lot of randomness comes into play. Notice, by the way, that in a lot of these countries we've hit early on, thanks to the Spore Burst, we're getting a lot of critical mass. And that is including places like China. So very soon, the genetic drift is going to start getting very, very bad. This is where I could make the decision to skip out on drug resistance level 2 and instead start focusing on some transmissions and on some symptoms before they increase in cost anymore. And I think that's viable. We could delay drug resistance. That is something you can certainly try, but I'm going to stick with this and hopefully it ends up being the right call. Now that I have that, I'm going to go for some additional symptoms. I'm going to go for some coughing for infectivity, and I want to go for pneumonia for more cold climates. You still want that in order to make sure that you spread faster in places like Scandinavia and in Russia. So let's go ahead and do that before it gets more expensive. Then we'll continue with things like air, water, and birds level 2. Extreme bioaerosol is actually kind of optional in this. It's still pretty powerful and not a bad idea, but it's not strictly necessary. Now, the mutation is working against me here. I've got immune suppression. I kind of need to refund this. I don't even really like that I have the fever. I may want to just go ahead and refund that too, because that extra lethality can become a problem. No one started really shutting things down yet, but any further than this, and it would become an issue. So let's go ahead and pick up the water. I'm going to go ahead and pick up the birds. Now, you need to buy some time as you start spreading, because here's the thing. We're going to start spreading throughout the world using land transmission here. I need to wait until only 8 nations remain that are uninfected, and then I will pop my spore eruptions. So I want to save a lot of DNA so I can start picking up at least a few more symptoms. Alternatively, you can go ahead and start getting aggressive. You can go ahead and pick up the necrosis now. Again, they can't exactly shut down their ports on you. The spore eruptions will work, but land transmission will go down dramatically. So I want to slow things down here. I want to buy myself time. This is where the genetic hardening becomes useful. We're just going to sit back, kind of buy ourselves a bit more time, buy ourselves some more DNA, and just kind of wait to see how quickly we can spread to the remaining nations. Again, I'm looking for 8. Specifically, I want to make sure that all of the islands are infected. That is the most important thing. Birds can counteract land transmission a little bit, but if the ports shut down for a boat and you don't have any spore eruptions left, then you're just out of luck. I'm so sorry. It is what it is. Let's go and pick up that Extreme Bioaerosol. I'll just go ahead and do it. I think it's still a reasonable choice to spread into places like North America a little bit faster. I'm a little concerned about Canada. There are only 8 nations left, so we can actually go for our Spore Eruption here, and then we can go for our lethality. So let's do a Spore Eruption. We should infect 4 nations. Boom. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, in this case, 5. Let's go ahead and do another one, and this should finish off everything remaining. Why did Greenland and New Zealand not get infected? That's a huge problem. What basically just happened there is I think that our Spore Eruption should have infected 4 nations, and it rolled Iceland and Madagascar twice each. Which means now we're in trouble, because I don't think I can get into New Zealand and into Greenland normally. So you can go for Spore Hardening. This is a decent bit of extra infectivity, and spores are continually released. We'll go ahead and pick this up. This is your stopgap measure to hope that maybe you just randomly infect those countries. But this might be a reboot here, because we just got very unlucky with our Spore Eruption. That said, we can't afford to wait anymore, and it looks like we just evolved Necrosis for free, which is obviously phenomenal. So let's go ahead and pick up Pulmonary Fibrosis, and we need to go for Total Organ Failure and just try to start killing people here, because at this point the cure is now going very, very quickly. If we can't start killing people quickly, we just lose the game. So we just have to do it. We have to kill off Europe and Asia fast. The fact that North America and the USA in particular is not fully infected is very much a problem for us, but we'll see what happens. Now, I don't like relying on the Spore Eruption here. I find that it's just, the Spore Hardening is just so unreliable as far as actually infecting new nations. I just don't find that it's useful. It doesn't really save your games too often. Let's go for Coma, let's go for Paralysis, let's go for Insanity. That's going to slow down the cure rather dramatically, set things back down to 64%. But at this point, like, we're going to lose anyway, because, you know, whatever they say about Spore Hardening, spores continually released, it's just a lie, man. It's just a lie. It doesn't really seem to help you that often. So we're going to lose now because of that. This is where we now have to reload. Now, if you are going to be doing a bunch of these Spore Bursts, I think it's perfectly fine to save your game and then reload if the bursts are absolutely horrendous. We could have done that, and it might have saved my run here. Some people think that's kind of cheating. I'd say no judgment from me. So let's go ahead and start over, because, yeah, this is how Mega Brutal runs, and we're going to do the exact same build order, but you're going to find that this ends up looking very dramatically different. Okay, so once that's all said and done, this is what our spread is going to look like. We hit some islands. I did get into Mexico, which means I'm now going to have access to North and South America by land, which is going to be very, very helpful. So this is an acceptable spread. It's not amazing, but it's decent. I'll run with it. We also just got a very lucky pop-up this time around for very high levels of bird migration, which actually means that bird is now extra effective for land-based transmission. So we'll end up picking up bird 2 anyway. I'm going to follow the exact same build order. Just be aware that things like that can happen, and that's going to make the fungus run a lot easier. One thing that really worries me about this particular run, though, is we don't have much of a spread in Europe yet. So Europe is going to start working very aggressively on that cure, and it's going to become a problem for us. Consistently, though, this build is still working largely the same as before. By the time that the world starts working at about 2% on the cure progress, that's when I'm already picking up my first level of genetic hardening, and I'm almost ready for level 2. So far, the timing of this is still working out beautifully, where I'm getting my genetic hardening just in time to get the most value from it. Once again, we've reached a point where only 7 nations are left to infect. So this is where I would encourage you to go ahead and save the game, and we're going to try doing some Spore Eruptions again. Again, I don't care if you think that saving is kind of cheaty. When you're dealing with a lot of RNG, sometimes you just don't feel like wasting all of your time, right? Besides, this is Mega Brutal. Sometimes you have to do whatever you can in order to win. Alright, so at this point, this time around, the Spore Bursts did work the way they were supposed to. Every country in the world has been infected, which means it's time to start going for the kill before we infect too many other places and have the genetic drift get even worse on us. We'll start with our typical Necrosis, go down toward Total Organ Failure and Coma, then we can go for Insanity and Paralysis, and everything else can go into genetic reshuffles. But hopefully, if this works the way that it's supposed to, we've effectively won. Now it's a matter of just, like, going fast enough. And if we can kill quickly enough, we're going to start generating quite a lot of DNA. You can see this gradually building up. Let's go ahead and pick up that Total Organ Failure. That extra lethality is going to start generating an absolute ton of extra DNA for us. They're about halfway through the cure, so we still need to go kind of quickly here. But we did infect pretty much all of the wealthy places that can get us killed and research quickly. So we're going to start destroying that cure progress very, very very quickly. Coma is the next thing that I really want to go for. Again, that slows down the cure, sets things back a little bit. We're going to go for probably seizures and then insanity, then paralysis after that. Half of the world is dead. From here on out, we're seeing the cure priority is getting destroyed, so we should have basically won this now. Let's go for you, pick up insanity. That's coming up next, 34 DNA. Waiting for the paralysis, and boom, we've won. Okay, so that overall ended up being a much, much better run, and that's because we just got a little bit luckier as far as our spore eruption. That's where these things can mess you up. That's why the fungus is so gosh dang inconsistent and really makes people a little bit angry to play, and I can't say that I really blame them. It is very, very annoying. I may not even get one level of genetic reshuffle. It looks like we're actually going to kill so quickly. I didn't even get enough DNA for that. One more orange bubble would do the job. There we go. All right, that just resets the cure progress a tiny little bit and gets me a little bit of extra score. That's why I wanted that. So let's find out what our final score ends up being here. We got 4 stars, 482 days. I did a test run on this and got 450 days and about 45,000 score. Still not enough to go for 5 stars, but enough to say you won the fungus very respectably. I'm not unhappy about a 4-star victory. So yeah, that's the trick about the fungus, guys. You're going to have to use those spore bursts intelligently. You can go for the spore bursts before you go for any symptoms if you want to. I just really encourage you to go for the symptoms first, because that extra severity, those extra bits of DNA really add up and let you start picking up a lot more transmissions faster. It overall ends up being a much faster game for you, and it ends up being a lot more consistent. The fungus is fun. It really is. It's just good luck going for 5 stars. It's an exercise in absolute insanity. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you find this guide very helpful in some way. If so, of course, I would ask you to hit that like button and leave a comment. It does help. Subscribe for my future content, and I will see you guys next time.